Welcome, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to The Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer, here in the WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia studios, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Sonics Community Radio with Global Soul. Sebastian, will you take it away? Awesome. Thank you, Bass. That was pretty good. And we are back for the second hour with my special guest, Lisa Vasquez. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you.
And were you able to hear that?
Oh, I was. Yeah. It was
okay.
Beautiful.
Good. Yeah, it's so weird because with the soundboard, I have to plug it in with my phone through the soundboard. But for some reason, it doesn't want to port over when he's playing, so I had to put my phone on speaker so you can hear it. So that's always like, can you hear that? Can you hear that? Can you hear me now? So everybody, if you're just now tuning in, Lisa Vasquez is the publisher of House of Stitched magazine and also books. You're an author, among other things. And so if you missed the first hour, don't worry. You can go back and listen to it on the AdamMesserShow.com, or you can look it up on any of your favorite podcast apps like Apple Podcasts, or it's on Amazon Audible and Amazon Music. It's on all the podcast things. But I've been listening to it lately on YouTube. So I do have a YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Adam Messer. Just try to keep it real simple so you can go back and listen to that first hour. And Lisa and I were getting into like the publishing and the nuts and bolts and stuff like that, and talking about interviews. So you do a lot of interviews as well, huh, Lisa?
Oh, yes.
So as an interviewer, as a journalist, what's something that you enjoy doing with your interviews that you do with people?
I think probably the best part is when they show up, they usually are a little tense. So, getting them to relax and, just talk to me as if, we're two old friends catching up over, a drink, cup of coffee, whatever. And when they start to just really relax and get into the stories that they want to tell, it's like you were saying earlier, like, what are we going to talk about for 2 hours? I never give them a time limit. I just say, when you're done, you're done. And sometimes they go for about 2 hours, and then they're like, oh, it's been 2 hours, I should go.
Yeah. I've had guests that ask about that.
Forget that they're in an interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had guests that they'll ask, because the radio show's 2 hours, and some of them will say, well, I'm not really sure what I could talk about for 2 hours. I'm like, oh, well, there's plenty to talk about. So
yeah.
And have a long format is nice because it's in my opinion, I like doing the long format a little bit better because you have more time than just quick sound bite. Which people are so used to, just like a little quick blurb or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I'm the same way though with my. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that's okay. The other good part is when they actually see how their interview comes out. A lot of them are really happy with it because, I make sure that they don't get shown in a bad light. I mean, if they're a negative person, I may say something like, it's going to be a short interview. I don't want to alienate or isolate anybody for something that's said. So, just being able to show them respect, people that we respect and admire, to show them in a light that's going to relate and engage with their audience. A lot of times they're really happy with that.
Yeah. I've only had a couple people one person that I quoted them directly, and not in a bad way or anything like that, but they came back and they're like, that's not what I meant at all. And I was like, well, this is exactly what you were saying. So,
right.
And I can't go back and,
so
yeah, I'm like, I can't go back and change it. I mean, like, whatever, but I've only had a couple people do that. And that's the style that actually with my interviews, the way I like to do it for the newspaper and for the radio show is I like to do like an informal chit chat with them just to kind of get to know you better. And I always let them know, hey, this is not the interview. I'm just, just want to get to know you a little better. Want to, learn a little bit about what you're doing. And then with the, it's weird, but with the newspaper, because I only get like about 500 words space for copy. And what I'll do is I will send them over if they want to do like just a strict phone interview, that's fine, or face to face. I haven't really been able to do a whole lot of face to face because of the COVID. But if they want to do a phone interview, that's fine. But what I also like to do is I'll send them a list of about 7 questions, and I send it over to them. They usually fill it out, send it back to me, and I explain to them like, hey, this is a way for you to be able to really think about, what you want to say and to represent, what you want to talk about. Now, I have some people that they'll send me back like maybe 300 or 400 words, and then I've had people that'll send back, like I had one guy send back like 3,000 words, and I'm like,
oh, wow.
I only get this much copy space, so like 95% of what you just sent me is going to get cut out. So, yeah, and then, but that always seems to work really well. Trying to do that, I enjoy that, putting them, trying to just to reflect what they're doing in a positive light as well. And, because I don't write about hard news, I write about, I like to call it popcorn because it's light and fluffy and everybody enjoys it. I write about events, I write about, stuff. And the folks that I interview, they're creative people, so 9 times out of 10, the folks are going to be really cool. They're usually, creators, and they're pretty nice people. Every once in a while, like I've had a couple of people that that've been on the show that've been kind of combative about things, and I'm like, this is not a good fit. Sorry. So.
Right. And what we like to say is we like to keep the the horror in the fiction. So we don't want to hear any of the bad stuff unless unless it's relevant to the process. Like, make sure you avoid doing stuff like this, or avoid this mistake or whatnot. But if it's going to be like dramatic and like just slinging dirt here and there, then I just tell them keep the horror in the fiction, because we're interested in very boxed in point of view of let's just talk about this, whatever they say outside of that, it doesn't go into the article,
right?
But they have the freedom to say, as long as they're not offensive. It's just I have not been questioned yet.
Have you ever had one where you're like, this is just not going to run?
I did have one where I was wondering my ability to pull out of it enough, but that was just, once I had a minute to kind of think about it, I was like, you know what, the way I write my interviews isn't question and answer style.
Right.
It's more of telling a story.
Right.
This is my experience in talking to them. So I was like, what did I take away from that? I did take a lot away from this. He's just very, to the point with everything, and that's fine. That's just how he is. And it was actually a very good interview. I just, in my head, when I first stopped and finished it, I was like, man, I wish there was more, but it was me. It was on me.
Right.
And that's what I did. So it turned out fine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, like, at least for the articles, I like to do both. Like sometimes I'll do like a little Q&A, and then other times I'll just write like a little narrative or whatever. But it just depends too. Like sometimes if it's something dry, or somebody's really dry, I try to fluff it up, not with anything, just extra, but I just try to spice it up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. Yeah, because some folks are really just dry. They're just like, I published the book. It's about, Frankenstein's monster. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
That's it. Is there anything else? No.
Yeah.
You have to read it. Like, yeah, we all know we want to read it.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about that too, is that's one of the things that in our mentoring with our authors is how to talk about your book. One of the things I used to tell them all the time is like, because we did Scares That Care in Virginia, and I got a table, and I just had everybody that I could come out, and so we had about 4 or 5 authors at the table.
Oh wow!
And I said, listen, if any one of you says, if somebody walking by and says, do you like, and they're looking at your stuff, and if you ask them, do you like to read, I'm going to pop you in the back of the head. Like, I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to pop you in the back of the head, because obviously they're coming to your table for a book,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody reads something. That usually, if they come to the table, they're of a reading age. So,
Mm-hmm. If they stop, they're
unless you,
gonna,
yeah, if
yeah,
they're looking and picking up things, it's not because, oh, what is this, crazy rectangular thing? It's they know it's a book, and they
yeah.
are interested in what's inside the pages. So, ask them something else or compliment them on what they're, start a conversation. Stop getting, inside your head, and really just talk to people. Get
Mm-hmm.
out from behind the table and talk to people. And yeah, it's a funny thing trying to get very introvert creators to step outside of their box.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've hosted several conventions and events and stuff like that, and it's crazy because whenever you work with any kind of vendor, so for example, an author at a convention's a vendor. Um, if like let's say there's 5 authors lined up, and you have one person that's standing up and they're greeting people when they come by and they're talking with
Mm-hmm.
them, not trying to sell them on the book,
Right.
just talking with them and engaging with the people that are coming by,
Mm-hmm.
versus the other 4 people are sitting behind the table, got their head down on the phone or might be reading or writing or whatever, not engaging with the readers that are there.
Yeah.
The person who's standing up and talking with the other people are going to sell, and then the 4 people who are sitting down are going to complain about not making any sales.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it over and over again. I had one. It was an event one time where the person had a nice setup. They had a really nice booth. They were selling like it was some kind of trinkets and gadgets and stuff or whatever, but they were sitting behind the table and did
Mm-hmm.
not. At the end of the day, they were complaining. I didn't make any money. I didn't make any money. This is my event, okay, that I hosted and I organized. And I was like, well, I'm not surprised. Every
Mm-hmm.
time I went past your table, you were sitting behind the table, not talking to people. And there were
Right.
like a couple thousand people that had come out to this event. And you always could tell the folks that they are engaged in what they're doing. You don't have to be a salesperson. You don't,
Mm-mm.
but you have to engage in talking with your readers. And if you believe in your story, well, this is a great story. Well, then talk about it.
Right.
People just are going to be naturally curious if you're talking about like, well, yeah, this is, Gort the Gondort, and that's why I call him that, because blah 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 blah, and you go on and on and on about it, and that other person's like, oh, that sounds really cool. I think I might want to read about Gort the Gondort.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And that's an important thing to address, and we do that as much as we can in the magazine, but also when we mentor authors, is how to get over that anxiety,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of introverts. I have severe social anxiety, and getting overcoming that, I was like, I have to do this and lead by example. So how do I cope, and what do I do? And
Right.
it was very tough the first couple of conventions that I went to, because like one of the first ones I went to was Comicpalooza, and it's in a football stadium, so I mean there's so many people, and it's
Right.
back to back, and it's shoulder to shoulder, and my anxiety, just kind of wrenches at me. And I'll be honest with you, the first one I did, I threw up right afterwards. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God. I'm down for 2 weeks mentally, because it's so much
Mm-hmm.
energy and so many coming face to face, and you have to work at it on top of remembering not to talk like an idiot. So one of the things that writers need to understand is, gone are the days where you just put this, obscure photo of an author on there that you may never ever meet, and then a bio. It's now being very personable, being
You have to be
accessible.
accessible. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
accessible, and being able to talk to people as a person, not
Yeah.
a salesman, as
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah. We got to do the station ID real quick. Everybody, you're tuning in
Okay.
today to the Adam Messer Show. I'm here with my special guest, Lisa Vasquez, and this is WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with Global Soul. Yeah, one of the things I always tell folks, because I'm not a sales guru, I do have a good grasp on sales, and I'm decent at it. But one of the things I always tell folks to remember is that everyone loves to buy. No one likes being sold.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, like, well, treat someone how you would want to be treated. Talk to them about what it is that you're doing, and don't don't lead off with like all the books $5, and because I've seen this too.
Yeah.
They're like the book's $5, or you could buy 2 for 10, or you could buy 3 for 20, or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, why would you start off with the price? Why would you start off with the price? Because that's the least of my concerns. I'm not looking at a book and basing it off of the cost of the book.
Right.
I'm looking at it like, your cover should be in the same genre. The right cover should be the right cover for the genre. So you're not looking at, a book about a superhero and then all of a sudden it's like a dark fantasy, and that doesn't match up with it,
One of the secrets we use is having things that are tangible.
Yeah.
So if they walk up, they can touch it, they can feel it, they can walk away with it.
Yeah.
So here's a bookmark, here's a pin, here's a sticker. Stickers are amazing.
Oh yeah, buttons and stickers. Buttons and stickers. Oh my gosh.
We did this thing where we've got pens, and they're also they're like little flashlights, but they're also stylus.
Yeah.
So we had these pens laying on there and the bookmarks and everything. And I tell you what, almost 90% of the con that we were at, people were walking around with our pens and whatnot. And, just having things that they can take away, because maybe they're not going to buy, they hadn't intended to buy a book that time, or maybe they spent all their money at, getting a photo and a selfie and all that. But if you have something that they can carry around with them, they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to go check this out, and have like a QR code on there or something that they can just go check it out. And if they've got your sticker on their laptop, they're going to be looking at it every day, so give them something that they can walk away with and say, and revisit you later. I've had plenty of those, like, hey, I met you at the con and I didn't have the money at the time, but 3 months later now they're purchasing our books and one of our fans. So it happens.
I love that, and I love chocolate bowls. Like I'll get a bowl full of like those little miniatures, or the the little tiny candies or whatever.
Yeah.
And people love that. They love the little swag, but people will remember you more than they will remember that candy bar or that pen or whatever. They're going to remember, oh man, I went to this thing and I saw this, this lady named Lisa, and she does this magazine. Well, I didn't buy one then, because I spent my money on, blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to check out the magazine because she said that the next one's coming out in the fall or whatever. And, so I think that's so cool because they won't remember what you said. They'll remember how you treated them. Right. And so, yeah, that's so cool. It's just one of those things where I think going back to the doing and being a doer and a producer, you pick up these little tricks and little tools or whatever, but you have to do. You have to produce. You have to make it happen. You can't just with the sales. I mean, like table sales is one thing. It's not even where most people make their money. Some people, that's where they make their money, but a lot of people, they make their money online. But you have to do those things, whatever it is. Like if you decide, hey, I'm going to be a con author and I'm going to go to these different conventions and blah blah blah, blah, and that's what you do, then do it. If your online presence, like some people, they have health issues and they cannot go out publicly like that, and so like their thing is, well, I'm just going to go online. Well, then engage the people that you're talking with there. Go to where they're at.
Absolutely. And not just, here's my link for my Amazon. Like, you have to talk to them. Please talk about your book.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Give us some information about it and tell us why we want it besides these other 7,000, and why I should pick up yours instead of Stephen King's this year. He just released a new book. Not to say you don't buy his. What I'm saying is buy mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why should I?
I think that's super important on anything you do in life, is just being consistent and doing the work. So.
And being adaptable is a huge thing too, because if you're doing something and it's not working, don't just say, well, it didn't work, so I give up.
Yeah.
Try something new. You can keep the same vein of what you're doing, but you can, just expand a little bit. Like us, our whole goal was to teach new authors. When COVID hit, I could have just shut doors.
Yeah.
I could have, but I didn't. I was like, no, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep doing this. How do I keep doing it? And you have to constantly be challenging yourself, because if you can't adapt with what's going on, you will eventually just fizzle out.
Oh yeah. Same thing with the radio show. I did the radio show all last year, all this year. And I didn't stop doing it because there were people that they really enjoyed listening to the show, and this was an outlet for them. And then, being consistent, I had to adapt though, because I used to have people in the studio and we'd interview and have people in the studio and doing it. So I had to start adapting and doing like the phone interviews, even with locals. Because
Yeah.
I had other people from all over before too, but having to adapt and overcome, and having to change it up was one of the things, and I've enjoyed it. And here it is. I just celebrated the 3rd year on the show, and I get to meet really cool people and talk to people about, what they're doing, and I enjoy it. And I feel like if I had just quit, I'd already been doing the show maybe like a year and a half at that point, if I
Yeah.
had just quit doing it, it would have just been like, well, and now I'm looking at like, okay, well, what's this like a couple years from now? When I hit my 5 year, what's this show going to be like next year? What's the show going to be like next month? I mean, like this interview today is a result of a couple of things. The commonality of like, our circle, me reaching out to you, us talking Friday, my guest canceling after we talked.
Right.
I had a guest that was lined up that canceled, like right after you and I had talked on the phone, and then I called you back. I was like, hey, this just happens to be, and I think if I hadn't, like you're talking about being able to adapt, some people, when they have an obstacle, they're like, well, that didn't work. And they just stop. And I'm like, well, how okay, yeah, that thing didn't work. How can I take it and make lemonade from lemons?
Right. Exactly.
And my friend Darlene was talking about that was part of the sermon that they had. They were talking about making, lemonade from lemons. And I've always been one of those people, if I fall down 9 times, I'm going to get back up 10. So
Right. As long as you can keep getting up, you should.
yeah, even if you can't get up, you can move. Like that one
Yeah.
phrase, like if you can't walk, crawl. If you can't crawl, just try to keep moving forward somehow or another.
Right.
So I think that's one of the important things about anything that you want to do in life, not just writing, not just publishing, anything you want to do in life. You have to keep trying and moving forward, and don't keep making the same mistakes.
Exactly.
Being consistent and, learning from. I was actually talking to my son today about, sometimes when you make a mistake, even if you don't know how to correct it, just don't repeat it. That's a step forward. Because if you make a mistake, but you don't know how to fix it, just don't do the mistake again, and you're already ahead of the game.
Exactly. One of the things I really apply to my life is that, for example, we have the Olympics going on, and they don't always want to get up and train, and they don't always want to give up their fun time, eating out with friends and doing all this other stuff. But it is something that they are so passionate about. It is something that they love so much that it doesn't matter what else is going on. It gets scheduled around what they train and breathe and eat and sleep and do. And to be an Olympic finalist or to compete in the Olympics, it's got to be, I am a world-class, athlete. Well, I want to be a world-class publisher. I want to be a world-class author.
Yep.
And so nothing is going to stop me from that, whether you're on board or not. The train keeps going. So I just
that's
keep
something.
going, keep trucking, and nothing else matters. During the times that I'm working, nothing else matters unless it's an emergency, unless I get that done. And when I get that done, then we could talk, we can play, we can do whatever we want to do. But otherwise, everything works around that schedule.
That's something I firmly believe in. The professionalism. And that's the difference between an amateur and a professional. A professional is going to do the work. They're going to continue to improve. They're going to continue to, to work at it day in and day out, meeting deadlines and overcoming obstacles and things like that. And it's not just a rah, 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 let's just be positive and we can overcome everything. No, it's not that. It's doing the work when the work is not fun to do. Like,
exactly.
I tell people all the time, when they're talking to me about like, asking me about whatever, I'm like, well, there's a lot of mysticism and a lot of romance around being an author and the idea of being an author. I was like, but what do you do when the honeymoon's over? When you're not in love with the idea of your story anymore and you're still 2/3 of the way from finishing it. What do you do then?
Right.
How do you push through that?
And those are the things that we need to tell people. So when they're looking at your magazine, they're looking at my magazine, they want to know the answers to those questions.
Right.
They don't care about, I mean, the first question everybody asks, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but for us, the first thing people usually ask, myself or my authors is, where do you get your ideas from?
I've had that question too, but not as often.
Yeah, we get it a lot. And so, I start off with that as the tip of the pyramid, right? So if I say, where do you get your ideas from? Of course they're getting from their head, right? Like
Well, like
they come
Gort
from
the
my head,
Gondort
or
was a random name I made up because you and I were talking and I wanted to make an example. Gort the
but
Gondort. You know what I mean?
Gort the
That's just a
Gondor, yeah.
weird, just
But if
random
you were
name.
to actually sit down and like for just a couple days or a couple hours and really thought, like, where did I get that from? Like, it sounds like something, I don't know. It would sound like something that you're like, oh, I probably got it from there. So yeah, if you sat down and you really thought about it, but each production of something comes from a different inspiration. So if I just say randomly, like, well, where do you get your ideas from? Well, I got them from my head.
Right.
or I got them from my dreams or whatever. A lot of my stories come from my dreams, but why am I dreaming that way? Why do I think I'm dreaming that way? Is there something going on that, have I always been the weird Wednesday that, always does this stuff? So, there's got to be somewhere that it deep down. So you're not just going at the tip of the pyramid, you're going into the tombs, you're going into these dark places that sometimes people haven't even had a chance because they were never asked what's going on. But when I start to discover things like, well, I have a fear of this, and so I wanted to write it and get it out. Well, what caused that fear? Because we'll hear that too. Well, I'm afraid of spiders, so I wanted to write about spiders. Okay. Well, what caused that fear? Was it something that you
I
just
am the
always
night.
had, or
right.
and
Yeah.
so it's interesting to find out some of those things. And sometimes another great surprise is sometimes they learn something about themselves from the interview with me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like
Yeah.
they'll be talking it out and they're like ding ding ding.
Yeah.
I have one for you talking about the same kind of thing. You remember I told you my first book, I was like, it took me like 12 months and I would write when I was inspired and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that I learned from that failure, which it was a failure. I mean, it was a success in some ways, but it was a failure in other ways. But one of the things I learned from the failure of that project was that you earn inspiration by doing the work.
Right.
You might have like that silly little name, Gort the Gondor. That was just an impromptu name that I came up with as an example while we were talking. I didn't have any other intention with it, right? But it's a funny, weird sounding name. You know what I mean? I'm not going to necessarily use that as a character name, but when you're doing the work, and for example, you said that people, and this is true because I've had the same thing happen, where people they'll have like a eureka moment when they're talking, and they're like, oh, well, I never really verbalized that.
Right.
And that's not what I really understood that's why I was doing it or whatever. Those little discovery moments are awesome.
Yeah.
I think those when people can walk away, like we were talking the other day, I always feel I want people to feel like $1 million when they do the interviews and they go to any one of my events or whatever. That's what I want them to feel like. I want them to feel like, man, I really got something to take away from this, and I feel enriched by it.
Yeah. When I did a couple of interviews, I have an author that's a doctor, but I did a couple of interviews with people who are in the medical profession and a couple that were, police officers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we think of them, like our impression of them is they're very like fact based, right? Like, suspect was doing this and blah blah blah, like it's very bullet point. So I asked them sometimes, like, was it hard for you to transition into something that's very creative and open and whatever? And I was surprised at the answer because I really thought it might be a little difficult for them, and they were like, no, it was actually easier because I had all the facts. All I had to do was talk about, what happened, and I'm dying to tell the story sometimes. And I'm like, well, there you go,
One of my authors, John Stamp, is actually in law enforcement, and he writes urban fantasy. And that's the same thing. Like, I think it's really interesting because our brain, we're multifaceted people. We're not just A, B, C.
Right.
We are all of those things and more. We have to do the station break real quick, Lisa. And then we will be back in about 2 minutes, y'all.
Okay.
And a solo recital in the beautiful rotunda of the Telfair Academy as part of the 9th season of the Savannah Voice Festival from August 8th through August 22nd. More information about the festival and tickets can be found at www.savannahvoicefestival.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
All right, and we are back, everybody. So you are tuning into the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. And my special guest today is Lisa Vasquez, who is the publisher of the House of Stitch magazine, also an author and editor, amongst other things. And so we've been talking about the nuts and the bolts of the kind of questions that you deal with authors. Now, I work with authors through my publishing company, and we work together on all these things that you're talking about. And it's really interesting having interviewed a lot of authors because these different things come up. And so one of the things I want to talk about, because we've got this last half an hour, is that you have this magazine. You also do you have a Patreon where you have kind of like behind the scenes stuff and all that. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And folks, for Patreon, now this is a community radio station. We're a nonprofit. We do not ask for any sales or anything like that. So we're not going to be trying to sell you on anything. There's no sales involved here. But Patreon is like this thing online where when you have like your favorite author or artist or whatever, that you can it's like a subscription support monthly thing that you can make a donation month, and they have different tier levels of like how you can support these folks or whatever. So I just want to explain to you that this is what Patreon is before we start talking about it, so that you have an idea of like what things are or whatever.
Right. So the Patreon is really cool because there you get the magazine, and it seems like there's 150 pages in the magazine, so there's a lot of stuff. And it's pretty
stout.
In there.
I picked it up and I've been going through it, and it's pretty stout. It's really good.
So when you go into a Patreon, all those things, those nuts and bolts that we're talking about, and the wheels and the gears, there's a lot of stuff we have left over. And we're like, well, what do we want to do with this? And so we want to share it, obviously. So what we do is we have little snippets of maybe the conversations in the interview that you get to listen to. But the best thing that we're doing right now is we're putting together a panel. And it promises not the beginning of a joke. So you have a pathologist, you have, assistant police chief. We're getting on board a homicide detective. We have high-level military and a former psychologist that we're going to present live scenarios, real life scenarios. So what happens if there's a zombie virus outbreak for real? And then they give us the protocols. And what this does is it serves two functions. Number one, the writer needs to know these things because the more you want it to be factual and you want it to be believable. But the reader also wants to know how much of suspension of belief are we looking at here? So would this really happen? How would that happen? And so only our Patreons will be able to Patreonians will be able to get in on those behind the scenes things. And there's just so much. There's so many different things that we offer, downloads for audio and things like that. So that's what we're doing with that, to kind of utilize our leftover stuff that are going to be super fun. And then of course, if you're not into that, that's okay too. The magazine has everything else that we put together in a nice cohesive bundle for you, and you can read it.
So that houseofstitched.com, does that have a link to your Patreon?
Yes, everything that you need to know about House of Stitch is on the House of Stitched website.
Yeah, and that's Stitched ED, like House of Stitched.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
ED. The reason why I was saying that is because it's real easy to sound like House of Stitch or House of Stitch. But Yeah, that's one of the things. I have a Patreon for Valhalla Books as well, and that's one of the things that I do with it is like behind the scenes stuff, and just like I might talk a little bit about stuff that I won't share publicly about, like say for
Right.
instance like our interview or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
this is a little nothing personal, nothing personal like that at all, but just little nuggets here and
Right.
there of
Some things you
information.
can't do here, you can
Yeah,
do there.
or,
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
or I might do like a little notebook sketch or something like that that I just share with my patrons and all. And but I think that's one of the cool things about being where we're at today, in the time that we live in, because for example, this interview right now would not have happened 30 years ago.
Correct.
Period. It just
Hmm.
there's no way that I would have known you, vice versa. No way we would have had the technology to be able to make it happen like this.
Right.
And that's one of the things I really enjoy, like us publishing books,
Hmm.
magazines, putting art out there, putting music out there, whatever. We have an incredible ability to be able to produce, and the gatekeeping is gone. You have to have.
The best thing about that too, not to interrupt you, but the
Yeah,
best
go
thing
on.
about that too is that the audience is no longer being told what to read, listen to, or whatever,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they have so much power now, and they just need to realize it.
Oh yeah, and I mean, like it's the. I know it sounds really crazy, but to me, it's like an information revolution because, and an entertainment revolution, because people are very adamant about what they like and they don't like.
Hmm.
Even to the point where there are a lot of great people out there. Don't get me wrong, but there are also a lot of toxic people out
Hmm.
there who are just they're the trolls, the internet trolls or
Right.
whatever. And you have to have you have to have a strong, thick skin, and be able to deflect that kind of stuff. But it doesn't. If like I've had people, I've had people that they looked at. We were talking this about the other day, but I had somebody recently that they're like, well, your writing's improved so much. You should go back and rewrite that first book or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's a window in time. That was a photo of that
Hmm.
that time. I'm glad that my writing's improved, but I can't change that.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
like, I'm not gonna do that. So I think that's one of the interesting things about the time that we live in, the availability, and then you see, like you and I have never met, we never talked before this last week, and that we have so many different things in common.
Right.
I think that's one of the nice things about the internet and us being able to do these kind of things. It's like you find out, like, well, yeah, I'm trying to paddle my own canoe, but there's also other people that are out there trying to paddle their own boat too. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so, like, if this worked for Lisa, maybe it might work for me. Maybe not. You never know.
And that's the beauty of it is, a lot of things that work for other people just don't work for me. And it has a lot to do with how I process what I do, what my vision is. Same with you. And you're never going to align completely 100% with another person.
Yeah.
And the part of the internet that's great is that, and this is why we don't compete, is because whatever I don't have, I'm happy for you to find what you need someplace
Right.
else.
Right.
Because I mean, there's so much out there. There's millions of books published every month
Mm-hmm.
on Amazon. I know, and I tell my writers this: you're writing that story for you. At least you better be, because your book and your story and your style and the way you tell it isn't for everyone. Just write it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you do for you, because like us finding each other, there's somebody's going to geek out about it with you. Somebody will, I promise.
Oh yeah, and I this last year or so, this has been a motto of mine. But I've been turning into people turning into me,
Hmm.
and the folks that have not, and the folks that that they show you through their actions, I just
Yes.
I just disengage with them.
Yep.
And and it's fine. I mean, no ill will or no anger or anything like that. It's just more of
Exactly.
I don't have enough time in the day to chase anybody, first of all, and secondly, I if you don't like me or if you don't like my work or whatever, that's fine. That's fine.
The most powerful message you can give somebody is silence.
Yeah, yeah,
So if you know, you know. If you don't know, then it's up to that person to come and say, what did I do? How do I mend this? But normally, and I feel like you're kind of the same way, just from us talking, like it would take a lot to push somebody to me to, you know what I'm saying? Like if they mess up one or two times, I'm like, okay, you know what? Bad day, whatever. But it would take a lot for somebody for me to disengage. And when I do,
Yeah.
90% of the time when I do, and I do a 90% percentage all the time, but a 90% of the time, if I disengage somebody, they already know. And there is no conversation after that.
Yeah. It's done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm the same way. And I try to, the same thing. I try to give people a chance, or I try to reach out, but at some point you're like, well, why am I, and with the readers or with the audience or whatever, like you said earlier about, if you've lost that audience, or, they've, you didn't capture that audience, or you didn't, embrace them, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. That's fine. It's mm-hmm. going to happen, right. I'm not too worried about that, because I know that my stuff's not going to be for everybody. I've right. had people that they're good friends, but they don't like what I write, because they don't like the genre. And right. so there's no problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. I have other people who support my writing and stuff, and they have never read any of my books. They just try to support my writing because they want to support me.
And that's good too.
Yeah. And that's, and the way this is one of the ways I try to explain to people, like, that's cool. If, it's not going to be for everybody. If you know somebody and you want to recommend it, that they're into sci-fi, or they're into fantasy, or they're into horror, or whatever, that's great.
You never know who you're going to run into that has that interest. I've been surprised so many times when people say, oh, I love horror. And I'm like, what? I would never have expected that. And here's a little funny story. So my son is in the military, and he moved to North Carolina. And nice. So on their little group, they're like, hey, they talk in their community, like, hey, there's an opening. We got new neighbors. You need to say hello. Come to find out, one of I don't want to drop her name because it's kind of private, but like she was on this community page. So my daughter-in-law calls me. She's like, do you know this girl? I'm like, actually, I do.
Oh,
so
wow.
she knows her. She's a horror editor.
Oh, wow.
And she's well known. And so I messaged her because I was like, I don't know if I should message her. Like, that would be creepy. But I was like, no, screw it. I'm gonna message her. So I messaged her. I'm like, hey, and I tell her the situation. She's like, get out of here. But that's what I'm saying. It's such a small world. We think I have authors in Australia. I have authors in the Philippines. I have authors here in the UK. But it's such a small world. The 6 degrees of separation kind of goes down to 3, I think, in the horror world.
Yeah, I agree. I think you find there's a lot of people that, at least through the internet,
Yeah. And I think a good point to that too is, if you're an author and you do something that causes drama, or you're difficult to work with, bet your bottom dollar publishers are talking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's also true in life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I think the days of being able to be a difficult person, and just being just nasty to other people, people are kind of fed up with that, and they're just holding more people accountable about it.
Yeah.
So if you're difficult to deal with or whatever, I mean, people just don't want to put up with it anymore.
And they shouldn't. They shouldn't have to.
So that's something.
I don't have time for drama. I just have time for working. For
right.
me, honestly.
Right. Especially when it comes to something where, like, talk about the contract, having to let somebody go early. It's like, that wasn't on me, bud. That was definitely not on me. That like, if I try to work with you and you're just whatever, that's not on me. Bass, you want to play some? So, all right. So here's Sebastian Messer's A Quarter Hour. You're listening to The Adam Messer Show here on WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. some. Thank you, Bass. That was really good.
Excellent.
You
I
know
love
that.
the range of the music. It's
Oh
great.
yeah, he's playing acoustic. He's usually
I like to play the electric a lot more.
yeah, he's a
Uh,
better.
the
Well, he's a good
acoustic's
guitarist all the
little-
way around, but I think your electric playing is pretty darn good.
Yeah. The
Usually he plays
acoustic's
heavy metal.
A little more
That's what I'm
portable.
saying. The range is great.
Yeah, that last bit of the conversation there, dealing with difficult people. I think that's an important part too, Lisa. Like with publishing and working with authors, it's I don't know how to say it, but I think that that the prima donna stuff or whatever, it's just there's not enough time in the day to work with somebody like that. And
Right.
like I had a conversation with one person one time. I was like, look, we're selling books, book to book, and you can't just write and post whatever you want to post and then just think it's okay with people, because they're going to be like,
Right.
well, if I don't like you, I'm not going to read your books.
Oh yeah. Oh
You know,
yeah.
and,
Nobody wants to give their money to somebody who stands for something they abhor.
Right, right.
It's not going to happen.
And it's just one of those things. I think going back to the people by you, or like you're talking about with this, the what you find your why. I've told people, and I tell them this, but like if you think you're going to get into writing and selling books and just be an overnight success, maybe. You get that chance, like scratching off a lottery ticket and winning $1 million. I mean, everybody does. But most of the people that I've ever met, they, I mean, even the folks that are making it, I mean, you can go to any retail bookstore and you can find a bazillion books, but I don't care about that. You go to the grocery store and see who's selling.
Right.
Where the shelf space is like premium and that's all they've got room for. And see who's selling. See who's got like 20 something odd copies of different books and different titles, and versus like me trying to get in on that market.
I think it's important too to understand the working relationship. I think if you're an author and you're like, I want to get a publisher, understand what the publisher does for you.
Yeah.
A publisher, and we had talked briefly about this too, a publisher is not your agent. Your publisher is the vehicle.
Right.
It's going to get your book formatted. It's going to, yes, it will do some marketing, but we've got other authors and other books to focus on. So, once we're done with the marketing of that, it's not going to be blown up. Like, we're still, obviously we want to sell the book. Otherwise we wouldn't put the work into it. But we can only do so much if you're not going to support that. If you're just going to sit back and be like, yep, I got a publisher. Like, well, you don't have an agent though. The agent is the one that, hits boots to the ground and talks to everybody about your book and does all that stuff, but you still have to talk about your book. And knowing what that relationship is and how it works and how you can support it is super important. Of course, you're excited because a publisher wants your book. Nobody is going to take that joy away from you, but understanding what that working relationship is about. For example, when we do covers, we like to get a lot of input from the author, but ultimately it is my decision. And I ran into this issue a little bit because of myself, because I didn't put my foot down, where I was like, kept making revisions and kept doing this. And then the book wouldn't sell as well as it should have. And I'm like, can I have creative freedom to try this again? Because I really think it's the cover. And if we took away some of the elements that you wanted in there and maybe just focused, our brains can only process so much. And if there's a cluttered cover, then they're not understanding what the message of the book is. So when we start narrowing it down and simplifying it and doing different things, they get to learn. And sometimes it's a hard lesson, but if you have to be open to learning, and you have to be understanding that your publisher, while they work for you, they are also a business, and they also work for themselves, and they know the best way to get that book into people's hands. And you have to trust the process or go with a different publisher.
Yeah, and I kind of look at the side of the author's work for the publisher too, because
that too,
they have
yes.
to get out there and promote their books. They have to get out there and work and do that, because if they don't, then what's the point?
I mean, it's a partnership, and if you aren't pulling your weight in that partnership, then it's not going to work.
Right. So I think that's an interesting perspective, and that kind of goes back to like with the sales, the book sales or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand there are a lot of people who are introverts or whatever, but if I don't care how good of the mousetrap you make, if you can't explain to people why it's better than the old one, they're not going to switch. They're not
Right.
gonna, they're not gonna. I don't care if you've got the worst cover in the world, but you got the best story, and people read it because they're like, oh, I really like, I like Lisa, and so I'm gonna check out, this book, even though it's just, I mean, look at the old books before. I mean, like the book cover thing is kind of a recent thing,
Mm-hmm.
like when they started doing pulp covers, they started doing like really, outlandish covers to get sales, but books before that, they were plain, I mean,
Right.
like really
There's a
expensive
title.
books. Yeah, the really expensive books, they might have had engraving, or they might have had some illustrations or something like that. But most books, they were not. They had a cover. They might have had a dust jacket, but they didn't have fancy covers.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have graphic design and illustration, and color was expensive. Like
It
doing any
was
kind of
all
printing in
word of
color.
mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
So
all
people would
word of
read a
mouth.
story, and it's like, oh, did you hear about blah 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 blah?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look
And
at
I think that's what readers and audiences, not just readers, but people who listen to music, whatever, just treat it across the board. If you are excited, you love this story, please tell your friends about it,
yeah.
because most of the time, even if, let's say, they don't normally enjoy the horror genre, but we've run across, I know I have, I'm sure you have, authors who can write a horror story that has nothing in it that is triggering, your top triggers. Like there's
Right.
no, you know,
Just extreme stuff. Yeah.
yeah, very extreme things, or things
Yeah.
that, you would trust your 13-year-old to read it. They may get scared by the ghost or whatever, but
Yeah.
you would trust your 13-year-old to read this and share the genre of horror with you. If they like to have, scary stories or whatever. I would much rather them read a book that, I trust them to read than to watch horror movies. So
Oh yeah,
reason's
and
good
some
anyway, right?
yeah, and like talking about that, and we've only got a couple minutes left, but talking about that, like I know that's one of the things where it's just to use the food as an example. I love using food as an example, but if you go to one restaurant that serves cheeseburgers,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go to a different restaurant that serves cheeseburgers, and the one is a fast food joint, the other one is a mom and pop greasy spoon, right?
Mm-hmm.
That fast food joint, you can go from here to Timbuktu and get the same
Mm-hmm.
factory made burger.
Right.
You go to that greasy spoon, and it might be a hole in the wall, but they might have some of the most lip smacking delicious cheeseburgers that you've ever had in your whole life.
Right. Right.
Because they that's what they've got. That is
Mm-hmm.
their little restaurant, and that's what they've got. They don't have an assembly line. There's not 5,000 people pushing out burgers. They've got Joe in the back who's flipping burgers on on the grill.
Right.
And I think that's
And
one.
the difference is that they put so much of themselves into it, and maybe it's a family recipe that they just enjoyed their whole life, but it's something they love, and they put it into there, and they're sharing it with other people. So it's a big
It's
deal.
not mass produced. You're getting an individual. Even though they might make it the same way every time, Joe's taking that patty and making that patty by hand every time, not
Right.
popping it out of a freezer box.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the neat things with horror, or like you were talking about, it might have different elements and might not have anything in there. It's kind of like when you have a book that has romance in it, but it's not a romance novel.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
elements of romance, but it's not a romance novel. So
I think another important thing that I do want to talk about is that
Yeah.
when you're supporting your local and indie author, you have no idea how much that does for the community, because those indie authors are going to small businesses to help do their swag, and the people that are doing the swag are going to their
a ripple effect, yeah.
local. The ripple effect is so much larger than you realize. So when you do support your local businesses, and especially your authors, your creative, that enters into the algorithm of what you're going to get in your community. That means economy. That means, more creativity. They're saying, hey, the cells, we're gonna present it more. So please take that into consideration, that it's not just some Joe Schmo behind the computer screen. It is a whole, a whole system of economy.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa. Where is the best place that people can check out your stuff?
So my stuff, I have unsaintly.com. That's my personal stuff. So anything that has to do with my writing, book covers, art, whatever is on there. Houseofstitched.com is the magazine webpage. Our publishing company is stitchedsmilepublications.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being on the show. I definitely want to have you come back on. And we might, I don't know, we'll have to talk offline, but we might still be able to use that other date that I was asking you about too. Just because I feel like we've got so much we could talk about and share. And I love that ripple effect, because this whole conversation today, us, talking, not just about your magazine or my publishing company or whatever, the stuff that we've been talking about, and I feel like it's so important for people to be able to say, hey, it's not this huge, veil behind. It's not the Wizard of Oz here. These are things that you can take away from this conversation today, y'all, and be able to use it in your life today. You don't have to, it's no formula. You just take it and start using it. So that's one of the things I really like, and I definitely would love to have you back on.
Oh, I'd love to.